Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really fascinating, high-energy timeline to track something that literally shapes our everyday lives. We're talking about the evolution of citizenship and what it actually means to be a citizen.
Now, I want you to just think about this for a second. You have rights, right? The right to vote, the right to free speech, a fair trial. But where did they actually come from? They definitely didn't just appear out of thin air. As we're about to see, those modern rights you exercise today are the result of a very long, incredibly hard-fought historical journey. So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with part 1, what is citizenship? Then we'll hit ancient Greece and Rome, move into the Middle Ages, explore the modern revolutions, and wrap up with rights and duties. We're essentially time traveling from antiquity all the way to the modern classroom.
Okay, let's dive right into section 1. What is citizenship? The foundations of the whole concept. So the root of the word itself actually comes from the Latin term civitas, which just means city. At its core, citizenship is the condition that grants a person a sense of belonging to an organized community. But it's really important to remember that before this concept ever existed, back in prehistoric times, there was absolutely no such thing as a citizen. Prehistoric tribes and clans, whether they were patriarchal or matriarchal, were pretty much just ruled by the law of the strongest. It was all about territorial dominance and basic survival. Political rights? Yeah, not a thing yet. Moving right along to section 2, ancient Greece and Rome, and the actual birth of the citizen. To find the real birth of this idea, we have to travel back to Athens in the 5th century BC. In Athenian democracy, being a citizen meant you were literally right there in the mix, in the public square. It was defined by this really powerful rule of 3. You had equality before the law, liberty of expression and choice, and active participation in assemblies and tribunals. It was a totally hands-on responsibility where you were actively making decisions for your city-state. But actually, hold on. We need to put a pretty massive asterisk next to that democratic ideal. Because to be totally objective here, the philosophy didn't exactly match the reality. Participation was strictly limited. On one hand, citizens were exclusively free men of legal age born to Athenian parents. But on the other side, women, slaves, foreigners, and children were completely excluded. They were just left entirely out of this new civic equation.
Now let's fast forward to Rome and see how this idea evolved. For a long time, Roman citizenship was just for a privileged few living in the capital. But in the year 212 AD, the Emperor Caracalla made a monumental shift. He expanded citizenship to all free inhabitants across the empire's conquered territories. This brought some powerful legal rights, like protection against mistreatment under habeas corpus, but it importantly added heavy civic duties alongside them. Think mandatory military service and, of course, paying taxes.
All right, section 3, the Middle Ages, and a return to being subjects. If we time travel again, jumping forward to 476 AD and the fall of the Western Roman Empire, we see the concept of the active citizen practically vanish for the next 1,000 years. The Middle Ages were entirely dominated by the feudal hierarchy. People completely lost their political rights. Instead of being participating citizens, they just became subjects. At the top, you've got the absolute monarch, then the feudal lords, and way down at the bottom, the vassals and peasants. The masses owed absolute obedience and physical labor to the lords just to get basic protection. The individual citizen, as an idea, was basically erased. Which brings us to section 4, modern revolutions and reclaiming those lost rights. We have to jump all the way forward to the 17th and 18th centuries to see the citizen finally strike back against absolute monarchy. This era was completely ignited by the philosophical groundwork of thinkers like John Locke, and it sparked an explosive return of citizenship. The American Revolution in 1776 and then the French Revolution in 1789 entirely toppled the old absolute monarchies. They championed popular sovereignty and gave the world things like the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, putting it in writing that political power belongs to the people. But once again, time for that asterisk. We have to look at the objective historical reality here. Despite these beautiful, sweeping declarations of equality and liberty, the actual application fell short. Rights were largely restricted to free, adult, property-owning white men. Slavery tragically persisted well into the 19th century, and women were still entirely denied political rights and the right to vote. It really wasn't until much, much later that the definition truly expanded. I want to highlight the number 30 for you. This represents the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948. This was the absolute watershed moment. It finally began cementing civil, political, and social rights on a truly universal scale, essentially setting the baseline that no matter who you are, you have fundamental human rights.
And finally, Section 5, Rights and Duties, and the modern application. So the crucial point here is, what does all this history actually mean for us today? Well, we talk a lot about our rights, but having rights is only half the equation. Modern citizenship absolutely has to be balanced by an active commitment to our duties. These modern civic pillars include things like obeying the laws, paying taxes to fund public services, actively voting and participating in your community, and fundamentally, just respecting the rights and freedoms of the people around you. You know, what's truly interesting here is the dual nature of this role. Citizenship is not just a passive status printed on your passport. It's an active, continuous ethical practice. It requires you to intimately know what you're owed by society, absolutely. But just as importantly, you have to know what you owe to society in return. So where do we actually learn how to do all this? The sources point straight to the critical role of the school system. From preschool all the way up through university, a positive educational environment is the absolute engine that builds ethical, moral citizens. The classroom is where we first learn to participate, to resolve conflicts, to respect each other, and to really understand that our individual voice actually matters. Which brings us to the end of our explainer. We've tracked a massive 2,500-year journey from the public squares of Athens right up to the modern democratic state. And I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. You have inherited this historic title of citizen. But are you just passively living in a society, or are you actively building it every single day? Think about that the next time you step out your front door. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey.